Hello, everyone. We're going to continue talking about modern America, and in particular today, the United States government post-Cold War. So there's been terrorist attacks since the end of the Cold War. And a terrorist attack is when the United States gets attacked by another country. And since the end of World War II, the United States has experienced multiple terrorist attacks at home and abroad, including the attack on the USS Cole in 2000, the September 11th, 2001 attacks on the World Trade Center towers, the Pentagon, and Flight 93, and the Boston Marathon bombing. So the attack on the USS Cole was an American Navy boat that was bombed by a group known as Al-Qaeda. So they bombed the U.S. naval boat, blew a hole, killed many people. And there's also the September 11th, 2011 attacks. And this was on the World Trade Center towers, which were two towers right here in New York City that a plane flew into, and they both towers collapsed. The Pentagon, which is just down the street from us, not too far, another plane was hijacked and ran into this. And then Flight 93, which crashed in Pennsylvania. But these planes were stolen, and they crashed into important buildings inside the United States. There was also the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013. So a bomb was set off during the Boston Marathon. The United States responded to those terrorist attacks by increasing security at home through the Patriot Act and the formation of the Transportation Security Administration. The United States also used diplomatic and military initiatives. The Patriot Act is a law that allows the government to listen to your calls and track your internet use if you're a suspected terrorist. So if the government thinks you're going to possibly commit a terrorist act, they will listen to your phone and they'll record what you're saying, and they'll also view your internet history. They'll see what websites you're going to, who you're emailing. And they also created the Transportation Security Administration, and this makes sure that people are safe when you travel. And this is why you get searched before you get on a plane, or if you get on a train, they have to go through security. Just make sure people are safe now. So now we're going to talk about presidents since the post-Cold War era. President Ronald Reagan, he was a conservative Republican who advocated for tax cuts. So he wanted less taxes. He wanted the transfer of responsibilities to state governments. He didn't want the federal government to do as much. He wanted state governments to do more. He had the appointment of justices who exercised judicial restraint. There was also reduction in the number and scope of government programs and regulations. So he wanted less laws, less programs, but he did strengthen the American military. He was president for part of the he was president during the Cold War, so he strengthened the American military, made it stronger. And there's also the Reagan Revolution, which extended beyond his tenure in office with the election of his vice president, George H.W. Bush. The Republican sweep of congressional elections and state houses in the 1990s, and the election of George H.W. Bush as president, and the formation of the Tea Party movement, and its influence in the Republican era. So Reagan, his influence continued even after he was president, and his vice president, his name was George H.W. Bush, became president, and George H.W.'s son becomes president later on, but that's George H.W. Bush. And President George H.W. Bush was president from 1989 to 1993, sorry. His presidency saw the end of the Cold War with the end of communism in Eastern Europe and the breakup of the Soviet state. In the reunification of Germany. So he was president for the end of the Cold War. And he was also president for the Persian Gulf War of 1990 to 1991. It's also known as Operation Desert Storm, which was the first war in which American women served in combat role. And that was a war in Iraq. And he signed the American with Disabilities Act of 1990 and the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990. We already learned about the American Disabilities Act. It allows people with disabilities to have an equal opportunity. And he also signed the Clean Air Act amendments in 1990. Then William Clinton became president. He's better known as Bill Clinton, and his wife Hillary Clinton just recently ran for president, lost to Donald Trump. But Clinton signed the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was a trade agreement between Canada, United States, and Mexico. He restored full diplomatic relations with Vietnam, lifting of economic sanctions against South Africa when the policy of apartheid ended, and dramatically reshaped welfare programs and helped reduce federal welfare spending. Apartheid was a system in South Africa, which is a country that segregated people, and it was very racist. But when apartheid ended, he continued talking to South Africa. Next was President George W. Bush from 2001 to 2009. And George W. Bush, his father was George H.W. Bush, and he launched the War on Terror, promoted policies on the economy, healthcare, education, and Social Security reform. He signed into law broad tax cuts, the Patriot Act, and the No Child Left Behind Act. In addition, he obtained congressional passage of economic programs intended to preserve American financial systems. And President George Bush was also president for the terrorist attacks on the United States soil on September 11th, 2001. And he also fought wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And his most famous domestic policy was the No Child Left Behind Act. And this has to do with schools, and it's part of the reason why we have SOL testing, because he wants to make sure every student receives a minimum education, that they pass a certain score. So that's why we have SOLs and different tests that we take. The last president we're going to talk about is Barack Obama, and he signed economic stimulus legislation in response to the Great Recession, including the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. He had tax relief, unemployment insurance, reauthorization, and Job Creation Act of 2010. And his most famous thing is signed healthcare legislation called Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act of 2010. He wanted to make sure every person in the U.S. had insurance for medical insurance. So if they got hurt or sick, that they were going to be covered. And it's also known as Obamacare. And that's probably his most well-known thing from when he was in office. And Barack Obama also oversaw the search for Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden is the person responsible for the 9/11 terrorist attacks and the campaign against Al-Qaeda. And he also withdrew the United States forces from Iraq. So they were able to capture and kill Osama bin Laden when he was president. This is the room he was at when they captured him. And he got the United States out of the Iraq war. He withdrawal of United States forces, which is the army, from Iraq. There was also a lot of technological advancements during this time, from space exploration. There were space shuttles. People are going to space now. There's the Mars rover, which was a robot in Mars. There was Voyager missions, which are robots at the end of the galaxy. And the Hubble telescope, which is a giant telescope in space. So scientists can study stars and planets that are far away from our planet. Robotics are also a big thing now. There's robotics and automated machinery are becoming even more and more important. I mean, when you go to McDonald's now, you can order on your phone. There's lots of companies now that have robots, machines doing the work. You don't need people as much. And there was also medical care advancements. The polio vaccine by Dr. Jonas Salk. So people no longer get polio. In the United States, everybody gets a polio vaccine. A lot of people all over the world get it. And there's also cancer screening. So people are able to detect cancer earlier so they can treat it. And it kind of helps so less people are dying from cancer. All right, that's it for today. If you guys have any questions, let me know.